Okay, hey everybody. Welcome to our Fireside chat. My name is Andrew Shikiar. I'm with FIDO Alliance. I've been assured that there will be no jackhammering during this conversation, but you never know what's going to happen. Additionally, one other twist on this, we're going to change this into a drinking game. So every time we say Passkey, you all need to have a drink. Just joking, kind of. Sorry. All right, so let's get serious here. So we talk about Passkeys a lot. It's been wonderful from my perspective to see all the conversation around Passkeys, not just in the talks that FIDO representatives are having, but just in the hallways and in other keynotes. It's obviously top of mind for so many people. We all understand the threats associated with passwords and also the imperative just to provide easier sign-ins for your constituents. What's really cool, one of the slides I showed this morning was, Passkeys have really only been enabled across mobile devices for around 5.5 months. And in that time, we've seen some early adoption, which is really cool. And so the focus for today's conversation is with 3 organizations who have done or are proceeding with early Passkey rollouts, and to get their perspectives on the drivers for that, what they've seen, what they've learned, and some other considerations. We'll make sure to have time for questions from the audience as well, from all of you. So I'm going to jump into it, asking for introductions. I'm going to start with Rakan. I want you to start, and then Hannah, then Christiaan.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Rakan. I lead the product management team at Intuit that builds the identity verification and authentication platform. The platform powers about 1 billion authentications annually. We serve about 100 million users across our ecosystem offerings. So we have ecosystem offerings such as TurboTax, Mint, Credit Karma. These offerings are targeted for our consumers. And then we also have, our offerings in the small business space, which is the QuickBooks family of apps. Prior to Intuit, I was a product manager at eBay leading the authentication platform. And before that at Intel Security, building a password manager application. So been in the identity space for about a decade.
Hannah.
Hello, my name is Hannah Hodak. I'm a product manager of loyalty products, account, and authentication for Hyatt Hotels. I've been part of Hyatt's digital organization for about 15 years now. About 5 years ago, I moved into improving the digital experiences of our members of our loyalty program, World of Hyatt. And about 3 years ago, that expanded to include our authentication experiences.
Great. Christiaan.
Great. Hi, folks. I'm Christiaan. I'm a product manager at Google, been in this space for about a decade. I want to say I joined Google specifically to fight the good Passkey fight, although we only got this name pretty recently. Originally, it was just FIDO. I do 3 things FIDO related. I am the co-chair of the FIDO 2 technical working group inside the FIDO Alliance. I work with our platform partners, so Android and Chrome inside of Google on the product side to try and shape the offerings that we put out for developers like everyone here to use. And then what I've been busy with over the last year is taking what we've done on the standards, what we've implemented in platforms, and then actually making that into a product really that we can start pushing out to our own users. Arguably, that is the reason we got involved in this space 10 years ago, is to actually get this to Google users and in their hands. So do my plug right now so I don't have to do it later, g.co/Passkey. If you see me around, it's on the back of my t-shirt as well. So go there, sign up for Passkeys, and give me some feedback, please.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So let's start with the origin story for each of your organizations. How did your company, or why did your company embark upon using Passkeys for sign-in? What was the driver? How did you get started? And have you done other FIDO work prior? Rakan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So Intuit has been on the FIDO journey since the 2016-2017 timeframe, and we've been one of the early adopters of FIDO. So today, all of our mobile apps have FIDO authentication enabled. In fact, 85% of all of our authentication mobile apps is through FIDO, and we see great benefits of that. So when we see customers authenticated in FIDO, we see that the sign-in success rate is up to about 97%. And the time to sign in is reduced by about 70%. So we're seeing a lot of benefits on that front. With respect to Passkeys, let me actually contextualize, the Intuit platform, and we'll give you a good understanding of why we're going to towards Passkey. So as I said, we're a fintech platform, and we serve about 10 million consumers. We move about $500 billion in money movement on our platform. We manage about $2 trillion of invoices on the platform. On the consumer side, we have about 90 million consumers, and then we process about $110 billion in tax refunds annually. So there's a lot of like high value transactions that happen on the platform. And so the reason we want to go to Passkeys is one of the other things that I want to talk about is the behavior of our users. So our small business users, because they're managing their finances on a daily basis, they log in, multiple times a day. Whereas if you think about our consumers who come to our tax offering, they come episodically, seasonally, once a year. They tend to forget the password, and in fact, some of them come on, I'd say about a large majority of them also come on a new device, and so it's kind of like hard for them to like get into the product. With FIDO, the US, we've proven the benefit of FIDO, and so we want to take Passkeys moving forward. We want to be able to use Passkeys for the convenience aspect of it. Again, as I said, the sign and success rates are amazing on that. We want to use it from a security standpoint. We want to make sure that the authentications are phishing resistant. We've got to keep our customers back. And I think the final thing is that we've seen benefits from a business standpoint. Each basis points of sign and success rate increase translates into a top line, revenue dollar improvement. And obviously that also results in, call reduction to our customer support and so on and so forth. So we just want to bring that goodness that's on our mobile apps into the desktop web, the mobile webs, and have an equitable experience for all of our platforms.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's interesting. So one of the use cases you're talking about is users who are not that frequent visitors. So I pay my taxes once a year, and I'll come back every April, maybe on a new device. I'll most likely be resetting my password, so you can avoid all that with Passkeys. Eliminate the social engineering threat, eliminate the hassle, call support, and let people sign in more easily. And Hyatt, it's interesting, people visit that site more often than that, but maybe not frequently as well. What's your origin story, Hannah?
Yeah, it's certainly a mix. We have folks who come every day and folks who come every few years. Our CISO actually put WebAuthn on our radar a few years ago. We put a certain onus on our members that they need to protect their own accounts. We can do what we can, but if they use weak passwords, they're putting themselves at risk. And the goal of looking into WebAuthn was we need to provide our security-minded members better options, a better way to protect themselves. But we had a couple of concerns when we started looking into it. What are we going to do about account recovery? What are we going to do about folks who use multiple devices when they come and access the sites? But then lo and behold, last year, these announcements started rolling out that multi-device credentials were coming, that cross-device authentication was coming. And we found that not only were we going to have a more secure option that only a small percentage of our user base might use, but that we'd have a more secure and a much more usable option that really had some potential for some broader adoption. So especially when WWDC came out, the demos that we started to see for Passkeys, it made it pretty easy to sell our stakeholders that it's time to bump Passkeys to the front of the line. We started to dive in, figure out how we could make Passkeys work with our systems and with our flows. And about a little less than 2 months ago, we put out our initial implementation. You can now create Passkeys and sign in with them on Hyatt.com.
Fantastic. So Hyatt.com, g.co/Passkeys, lots of actions for everybody. That's super interesting. And what's really cool about what you said is that, a lot of the messages we put out about why we're doing Passkeys, enabling the private key to sync, were the exact pain points that you had with WebAuthn. So great on one device, challenging on multiple devices, worried about user experience, and Passkeys are aimed to address that. So Christiaan, I think we've talked about what Google's doing with Passkeys, so we don't need to go into that topic, but I am curious, a topic I want all of us to talk about. It is a migration to Passkeys, and I think there will be a period where people support both passwords and passkeys, other forms of 2FA. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on, what is your blend of authentication strategies, and for Google in particular, how has your 2SV program evolved, and where does Passkeys fit into that?
Great. Yeah. So our journey started about 14 years ago, right? There was a event that took place in 2009, Operation Aurora. Folks can go look that up, or maybe you remember it. And that is kind of like the catalyst for us, which made us invest very heavily into phishing-resistant authentication, which, by the way, did not exist at that point. There was no phishing-resistant 2SV, right, or MFA. There was MFA. There was push-based didn't exist yet. We had TOTP and HOTP-based authentication, the fobs that you carry around. Later on, the smartphone apps came. Google Authenticator, many others followed. But for us, the catalyst was that 2009 event that took place. Phishing was the origin there, as with most attacks still today. And actually, the founders at Google basically at that point said, we want to do something about this problem, and we never want this to happen again. How do we solve this? That's the origin story of FIDO U2F, at least, right? So phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication for our employee base. We started with that. That's what resulted in the physical security keys together with some other companies that we worked with, and we took that into the FIDO Alliance and became a formal program back in 2013. At that point also, we wanted to do something for consumers. That's where Google Authenticator started. I think that was released in 2010 or 2011. So Google Authenticator we released. That was the story for consumers. And then when we were ready with the security key technology, or FIDO U2F, we made that available to our consumers as well. So at that point, we had two options. Well, really three, right? We had Google Authenticator-based multi-factor authentication. We had security keys. And of course, we also had the status quo, the lowest common denominator that most folks here have, which is SMS OTP. SMS OTP is still widely used today, has a bunch of different issues. So we're trying to push users elsewhere. But even with some pretty substantial pushes over the years, because we've added another piece of technology since. We have push-based authentication now to many different Google apps. If you're a Google user, you'll know you can get push-based authentication on Android. You'll get it on iOS as well if you install one of our apps. So we have many different options available. Most of those still susceptible to phishing, except if you're using security keys, and then of course Passkeys now. So for us, it was kind of like a continuous journey. Started because of this event that took place, and then over time, we continuously added to our arsenal, easier to use options, more secure options. But the goal was always to kind of go back to the origin story, back to 2009, with that idea of bringing phishing-resistant authentication to our own employees, and then bringing phishing-resistant authentication to the masses. Security keys was a means to an end. We wanted to make it available, and if you were a user that had the requirements, maybe you're specifically targeted or you're a high-risk individual, you could get that kind of protection by buying into the hardware, getting a physical key, but we kind of knew that was never the way to scale to the rest of the world. WebAuthn, really, FIDO2, that was our investment there, and it wasn't until we really kind of sat down over the last 2.5, 3 years to try and address the pain points, the things that kept WebAuthn and FIDO2 from getting the adoption that it deserved, which are things like multi-device syncing, credential lifecycle management. That was kind of like the last puzzle piece that needed to fit into place. And now we feel that we have an offering that is ready for deployment. And that is honestly the reason why we've put our own deployment out there. It is to signal to the world that we think this is ready. Yes, there are still some rough edges that need sanding down. There are certainly still some things that we need to work on as an industry together. But we think the technology is far enough along that it can be a viable alternative to passwords and other legacy forms of MFA.
Super, thank you. Do either of you have any thoughts on, are you supporting other types of authentication? Do you want to dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do support, just like Christiaan mentioned, we do support obviously the passwords. We have SMS over OTP. We have the time-based one-time passcodes as well, and a bunch of other things. But I'd say that when you kind of look at the passwords with SMS over OTP, the success rates of that is roughly around 80%. When you kind of look at the FIDO I was talking about, it's up to about 97%. By the way, these numbers are kind of public. You should go to knockknocklabs.com. We have a case that we did with Knock Knock Labs, and all the data is there. We've talked about our journey there.
Wait, can you restate that for that? It was 80%, 97%?
Yeah, it was 80. It's about 80% with legacy multi-factor authentication, and about 17-point lift when you use FIDO. The other aspect of it is that it also helps us when you kind of think of the FIDO, right? There's some customers who are in remote locations and cannot get cellular connectivity, and so they're kind of like hosed in that scenario, right? If they are abroad or if they're traveling on aircraft and stuff.
Sure. Okay.
We, a couple years ago, added an additional Magic Link option. We have an especially painful password-based flow on our site. So Magic Link really helped enable kind of our more infrequent users. It was a passwordless option, but there is certainly friction there. It's lots of extra steps. It takes a lot longer, but it has helped raise our success rates.
Yeah. That's interesting. Email OTP or email Magic Links. And I've seen a lot of sites kind of migrate to that. And if anyone caught the UX guidelines session immediately before, that's actually our recommendation. You kind of have this hybrid sign in, sign up page, where if you have a passkey, it'll trigger the passkey dialog. If you or it could potentially send you an email link as well. Let's talk about passwords for a second. I guess I was kind of stating as a fact that they're problematic, but do any of you have any sort of password war stories or anything in particular that jumped out at you about some pain points you've had in the past managing passwords?
I would say our entire roadmap is kind of based on the risks and inefficiencies of passwords. If you try and log into your Hyatt account using a password right now, we actually require 3 different pieces of information as opposed to most sites that only require 2. As your unique identifier, we do not allow you to use your email address. You have to use your World of Hyatt membership ID, which absolutely no one knows. I don't even know my membership number. We do require password, and then we also require last name. Most people know their last names. There are some edge cases, but password managers, autofill, they don't recognize that field. So even folks who kind of figured it out, they've got their credentials saved, they still need to go in and type that last name field. We know it's extremely painful. We see a lot of problems with it, but we also have seen it successfully keeps fraud significantly down for us. So we haven't felt comfortable to get rid of it. Part of our roadmap is trying to get around these inefficiencies, these risks with passwords, so that we can make that option if we keep it less painful for our users, but also without compromising the security around it.
So Hannah, it sounds like WebAuthn was on your roadmap for a couple of years when Passkeys came out as a natural evolution for you. Rakan, you've been working on this for a while, but I'm curious, when you first started down this path of driving Passkeys into Intuit, even at your time on eBay, did you face internal objections? How did you as a kind of a champion for this get this moving forward? How did you overcome objections? What are some tips people can take in the audience if they want to move their own organizations forward? What are some suggestions you have for them?
Yeah, so as I said, we've been doing FIDO authentication since 2017, and so the classic FIDO authentication is the UF protocol where the private key is bound to the device. And so when Passkeys came up and when we started kind of discussing with internal stakeholders, I think the inherent aspect of the passkey being syncable was a concern. I wouldn't say there was a pushback but there was a concern and a discomfort. And primarily because of the fact that, the UF passkey is bound to the device creates, a very secure experience. But I think the way to look at this is to kind of look at it as the alternative. So what's the alternative out there compared to a passkey? The alternative out there is a password plus an SMS OTP or a password over TOTP and so on and so forth, whether mobile push, right? Is the alternative of these better than passkeys? My point of view is that passkeys are a better alternative due to the inherent properties that it has. So it's domain bound, the fact that Google and Apple kind of end-to-end encrypted, the fact that on Apple the iCloud keychain is protected by multi-factor authentication. So that kind of alleviates some of the concerns. But I think it's you got to look at your business, you got to look at the risk, and essentially make a judgment on that. And that's the way that we were able to kind of position Passkey as one of the authentication methods. It's not there, but it's going to be coming in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Sounds like it's in progress.
Yeah.
Hannah, how about yourself? I don't know if you had any objections, but like a slightly different twist on this question. What teams are involved? Right. So you went live 2 months ago. There's an engineering team, UX team, product team. Who touches this?
Sure. We have a core team. It's a mix of product, UX, and engineering. We then work with teams we kind of think of as shared services. So we work very closely with our InfoSec team, our leads on our fraud investigation team, content strategists, UX researchers, lawyers, marketers, always lawyers. So definitely folks from all over the organization. We're definitely involved.
Good. So let's talk about what have we seen so far? Any big aha moments? Christian, let's start with you because I know you have reams of data, and I don't know if everyone's heard about it yet, but let's talk about your data and about your general impressions of like what you're seeing so far with your Passkey implementation enablement.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for us, the launch is now, I want to say, it's today the 31st, right? So not even a month in, almost a month in, right? We launched on the 4th of May. It feels like a year ago. However, we were fortunate enough to, well, first off, we have a huge user base, right? So it takes us a fairly small amount of time to get a lot of data. That's the first good point. The other one is we've been running certain of these flows, like some of the flows, as Rakan mentioned, right? They've been doing FIDO stuff for years, right? Since 2017. We've been doing certain FIDO flows, FIDO web authent based flows in certain places for a number of years. I think in 2019 we published a blog that announced some of the work that we were doing. So in certain places we were actually gathering data for a very, very long time on success rates of FIDO to authentication, which is it is Passkeys, right? Passkeys enable a couple of additional things. It has account syncing and other stuff involved, the credential synchronization. But the base, I guess the components of Passkeys, we've been gathering data on that for a long time. That's partly why we're so confident and comfortable to go out the door with Passkeys when the technology feels fairly new. We have evidence and we have data on this technology going back a number of years. A day or two after our launch on the Friday, I believe it was the 5th, we published a blog on the Google security blog, so you can just Google for Google security blog, and you can find some data that we have back on, I think it's like across 100 million samples, like something pretty large, where we essentially went and we proved out that Passkeys fare much better than password-based authentication. I think it's a 4x increase in terms of users abandoning password-based flows, not being able to get in. But with Passkeys, they're able to do 4 times better and actually succeed in that particular flow. So that's the first thing. And as we are, again, Intuit say earlier here, that directly relates into, positive revenue and kind of like, you make more money if your users can actually get through the front door. So I think for us, that was very, very encouraging and one of the reasons why we embarked on this. And the other one is just, it takes users less time to complete the passkey flows than it takes them to complete the password flow. The password, you're typing stuff in, maybe you're copying and pasting from a password manager. Still, lots of users do not use password managers, so I guess they're typing or writing it down or whatever they're doing or copying it from a piece of paper. With Passkeys, you're kind of forced into the password manager world. So, once you start on that flow, if your finger works or your face is still your face, like you're gonna get in. So I think we're seeing a lot of positive success, and not only based on 2 days worth of data, but based on data that we've gathered over the last 3 years. So again, that data is there for citing and for using if you need to build an internal business case for why you want to invest in Passkeys. Please feel free to use that data. That is why we published it. And then, of course, as time goes on, there are certain aspects of Passkeys that we would like to publicize also. Some more data we want to share. There are certain things that we don't have in our original research, in our original, or on the original study that we've done. Cross-device passkey usage, like that's not something we've had. That we only launched, less than a month ago. Data on how well that is working, how well local device passkeys are working. That's all things I hope to share pretty soon. The initial data we're getting back looks very, very promising. Like, many of these particular cases. It's certainly better than passwords, which is kind of like the status quo. But not only that, you have to remember that to get a user logged in nowadays means the user has to go through a password flow, and they most probably have to go through some second factor, multi-factor authentication flow as well. Passkeys replace both of these. So it's really kind of like a multiplication between the success rates of the first one, and then kind of like that second flow, which you have to compare passkeys against. And if you look at that, pass rates in the industry is actually fairly low, right? Password and some second factor, depending on the second factor the user has to do. So not only do we have to compete against passwords, we actually compete against something that is even worse, which is like this two-step process, which I think both for the user and for the particular enterprise, passkeys just win on. So stay tuned for that data. That's something that we'd love to publicize at some point in time, but the initial indications are definitely trending in the right direction.
That's super interesting. Hannah, have you had any kind of big ahas or eye-opening results in your 2 months?
So we still have pretty low amounts of data. Our implementation is essentially you have to discover that it's there or read about it and go and find it. But actually, really interesting time to the Google rollout. We, by happenstance, rolled out our implementation about 3 weeks before Google. We started to see data. People started to find it right away and started to create passkeys. But when Google rolled out, we saw a lift on Hyatt.com, and I think it kind of is evidence of a trend that as passkeys become more prominent, more prevalent, more ubiquitous, everywhere, especially supported by sites like Google, that it will really increase adoption. It will have a halo effect on other implementations. It was exciting to see.
That's awesome. And that is part of the reason why we've gravitated towards this term passkeys. So as we talked about this morning, we're calling any password FIDO credential a passkey, but we've never had a brand before. WebAuthn has been live for years, but some people would say use WebAuthn, some would say use Windows Hello, use a biometric. It was different every single time. But by having everyone call these passwordless flows passkeys, it builds some mind share. So for those of you who are considering deploying passkeys, do it, but also make sure you leverage the brand and the icon, which is all free to use, to start building this halo effect to encourage more utilization as well. Why don't we pause in our questioning? Let me see. I might have one more before I go to the audience. Yes, I do. Let's talk about user testing and feedback. So there's a session before this about UX guidelines. How have your companies approached testing, pre-testing, and getting that feedback? What's that loop look like, Rakan?
Yeah, so we're currently in the process of doing a usability testing on the passkey flows. One of the things that we found out is while passkey is great, I think the concept of passkey, explaining that to our customers, it's a challenge. We see it time and again. That concept is hard to grok. And so I think it's important to make sure that content strategy is revved up and you kind of test out with your customers to see if it resonates with them. So we've been working through illustrations, different content, different benefit statements to see what resonates. One of the other things that we've found is that people are not aware of passkey, and that makes sense given the early stage that passkey is in. But with Google launching, where people are going to know about it, and I think that as Hannah said, the more the industry moves towards it, right, the more halo effects that it'll have. And I think we as a community in the industry need to kind of proliferate passkeys so that when customers or users go across the internet and digital footprints and log in, they see passkey, right? Habits are hard to change, but I think that with biometrics on mobile devices, it's shown that habits can be changed. But I think it's a matter of time before the passkey habit becomes a second nature.
Yeah, I think the analogy is Touch ID. People first started using phone biometrics. At that point, people didn't even know why they had to lock their phone, and then they're using pins, and they're like, "Why do I have to use my phone? It's silly. It's kind of nifty." But then all of a sudden, it's like, "Wait, that sure is easy and it's faster." And you went from it being kind of like an interesting feature to something. As people start unlocking their phones 70 times a day, it became more of a necessity. And you're unlocking your phone, and all of a sudden you're using it to log in and buy and stuff like that. So I think there is a precedent that we can build upon. And how about you?
Yeah, we did some moderated testing, and I think our results line up with a lot of what we've heard today. Christiaan mentioned it in his session earlier today, in the UX session that just preceded this, that really the selling point seems to be about convenience for people. You know, we tried to sell the security angle, and some people said, yes, that's great, we want a more secure option, but most people were, they expressed a sentiment that they're pretty resigned to the fact that their data is going to be breached at some point. But across the board, everyone was excited about having a faster and an easier option. So really selling them on the convenience and then kind of getting the halo benefit of, for both them and for us, that they're using a more secure method.
Christiaan, do you want to talk about your testing approach?
Yeah, I mean, I'll briefly talk about it. I think we've done a ton. We've done a lot of UXR, both qualitatively and quantitatively, over the last, say, 9 to 12 months. We started almost exactly to the day a year from our launch date, like a year ago, is when we decided that we wanted to get Passkeys out there by the next year. By May of 2023, and the first thing that we started doing was really started user interviews. Not that much different from what we've seen in the session just before, when certain clips were played of users being interviewed. So a lot of that kind of like really resonated with me, because that is where we started. What tested well? Originally, we were going out the door with phishing resistant, secure, and that actually ended up doing pretty badly. The second thing that we discovered is password replacement really didn't resonate with users, and I said that in the earlier session as well. And when we started digging into why don't users want to replace their passwords, it's because the primary thing they're worried about is getting locked out of their account. That's what they're worried about. Yes, they don't want to get breached and security and blow whatever, right? But they don't want to lose access to their account. It's important. Documents are in there, the photos are in there, other stuff, emails are in there. So they just don't want to lose access. And they understand passwords, they understand the pros and the cons. They don't understand this Passkey thing yet. So you can sell it as easier to use. That's really good. But the moment you say it's going to replace your password, it kind of like falls below the line. Because users are like, well, I mean, I just can't take this risk. So I think for us, a couple of things that we learned, the two topmost things through the qualitative research that we've done was that, don't emphasize security. Yes, security is important. That shouldn't be less secure than passwords, but certainly go out the door with ease of use, faster simplification. And then secondly, this is an extra step, right? This is, well, not an extra step, and something else, right? An alternative to the status quo. And then we're hoping over time, of course, that we can start to replace the password completely and start subjecting the user to more friction when they're going in through password flows. At some endpoint, maybe a couple of years from now, we can start turning down password flows completely, at least for regular sign-in, right? And recovery, those might remain for a little while longer. But I think, doing the qual type research and then backing it up with the quantitative research. I showed that this morning in my session, some screens, for example, after doing the research, then going out the door with multiple different screens, A/B testing those screens and seeing what the take rates are when you come with messaging to the user that emphasizes, usability over security, for example, and just validating the earlier, smaller, N. So the smaller research that we've done, that is essentially our strategy. That's what we've done. That ended up working very, very well. And then I'm very happy that at Google we decided that this is not research we want to keep to ourselves. This is research we want to really open source, right? We want to make this available. And I know our UX folks have been very, very closely working with the FIDO Alliance UX working group as well to try and get that data out there. That's data we want to share with industry because, again, as Hannah mentioned earlier, right, this is the rising tide that raises all boats, right? When we launch Passkeys, they get a lift on their side, right? Industry needs to work together. We've put a stake in the ground by getting this initial Passkey release out there. That certainly is the first tiny step, right? Now we need to get 1 billion users on Passkeys on the Google side. That will only happen if we have folks here in the audience today starting to deploy Passkeys on their platform so that users become familiar. And we don't go and read on Hacker News about the tech companies trying to do another data grab, right? That's not what Passkeys are. Passkeys are a way, simpler, safer way to get into your account. Simpler first, safer second. And for that to really take hold, we need everyone to take part in that vision.
Yeah, so a couple of reflections on that. First of all, what you showed today when you're talking about the testing you did was poured directly into that research, and also Intuit's findings was poured into that research. So it's really cool actually to see individual research teams taking your findings for your own implementations, but putting them into the guidelines so everyone else can leverage that as well. The other thing that's going to be super interesting is when you start doing that testing with users, and once they're comfortable with passkeys, testing on like what's going to push them to be okay with deleting their password. And that's going to be a very interesting data point down the road. Okay, so let's take some questions from the audience. Lorraine has a microphone, and so does this gentleman here.
A question for you, either yourself, Andrew, or Christian. Have you talked to any financial institutions and heard about any resistance that they have to implementing passkeys, or how are you overcoming that potential resistance?
No, they all love it. They all love it. They want to deploy. No, I mean, that is actually a great point. I think part of what we need to do now is we need to evangelize. We've done that a little bit, and we need to start listening more. What are the things that's keeping financial services companies from adopting passkeys? Earlier this year during RSA, we invited a bunch of financial services companies to come talk to us, be it Google, a bunch of others, part of the FIDO Alliance, about requirements, specifically around regulated industry, financial services industry. We are listening. I think we have an idea of what's missing. I would love to talk to more financial services companies, so please find me here or send me email. I'm cbrand@google.com. I'd love to hear about the things keeping you from adopting passkeys today, because we all know it'll take some time. If the decision is taken today to adopt, it's going to take time before that stuff finally rolls out. So we want to get in on that train early. So anyway, please talk to us. Love to know more. We are actively working on solving those issues.
Yeah, so some added context there. A couple thoughts. One, it's interesting. Our early adopters are, when you're talking about common thread between all three of your deployments, it's like we just want people to get online. Access is key, right? And that's the profile of early adopters have been in payments, e-commerce, generally, content. And banks have a different set of criteria, and they have, so I've heard a couple concerns. One's around compliance officers, and the other one is mainly that. What's interesting is before passkeys, the concern around WebAuthn was user experience. So the UX concern is no longer there, but it's a compliance concern. But I've heard several banks, like first of all, every major bank, at least in the US, is in active conversation within themselves inside FIDO Alliance with aims to deploy passkeys, right? So again, there is a sense of inevitability around it. It's a matter of how we get them to that place. But I've heard some banks talk about doing passkey sign-ins for accessing your account, but then doing step up for anything above that, as kind of an interim step. So I think there's a lot of people looking at creative ways that even companies concerned with compliance or regulatory constraints will be able to leverage passkeys as well.
So when you're talking about passkey implementation for your various companies, all the companies you guys are talking about are pretty much external facing. Have you had any headway of pushing passkeys as a replacement for at least base level passwords within your organizations?
I will say I don't know anything about it, but our Director of Identity and Access is presenting tomorrow because Hyatt has implemented FIDO on the enterprise side. I can't speak to any details, but I know that there is work underway on that front.
So, one important thing to note, again, so we have device-bound passkeys, right? So secure, like YubiKeys, security keys, things like that. Those have been deployed for years and will be continued to be deployed and leveraged. Like we talked about a little bit this morning, when we're talking about synced passkeys in enterprise, it does bring up some added considerations. They're a natural fit, in my point of view, for companies that are comfortable with, say, BYOD, right? If you're comfortable with that. And the fact of the matter is, MFA uptake right now in enterprise is so low, and I think Microsoft shared some stats based on their experience with Azure AD, like in the 20, 25%. And passkeys stand to immediately raise the number of people who can use MFA. But for highly regulated industry and other, higher assurance use cases, there are other considerations that an enterprise will need to consider if you're using synced passkeys. In those cases, you want to think about maybe adding a signal on top of that. Fundamentally, the thing I think is the thing to keep your mind on, or to not lose focus on, is that passkeys are a password replacement. Right? Passwords are a fundamentally flawed primary factor. So even if you're doing passkeys plus OTP, you're in such a better position than you would be with passwords plus OTP or any other kind of knowledge-based phishable form of MFA.
Thank you.
When you think about the developer experience, so if you look at like Cognito or Google Cloud Identity and so forth, for social login, it's a thing where it's a feature flag, no code, low code orchestration. What is it going to take to get passkeys to that same level of ease of development?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with that one just because, like, I think on our side there is more work to be done. The social sign-in is being sold specifically as it's easy, right? It's pretty trivial to implement. Today, passkeys and FIDO WebAuthn, pretty trivial to implement on the client side, but on the server side, there's some heavy lifting involved if you're starting from scratch, right? You need to store keys, you need to do signature validation, if you want to do attestation parsing, there's a whole bunch of stuff you have to do there. So almost no one wants to go and build that stuff from scratch. There is a number of different options today in terms of open source. There's many commercial vendors here also in the audience that have solutions that can address those problems. Just speaking purely from the Google side, I would love to have a Google Cloud offering, right? That makes this super easy. Think Firebase, right? Where you can just go in and say, give me FIDO and give me passkey support, and it's there. I think that is things we're actively looking into. Going the way that things are going, I think we'd love to get there. We have built our own implementation internally from the ground up. It'd be great to be able to externalize that. So definitely something we are looking into.
Yeah, but important to know, and one thing Christian mentioned in passing, there are vendors who are doing this.
Yep.
Doing this. So Auth0, Passage, Descope, Stitch are all members of FIDO Alliance with offerings on market today or emerging that will target this developer community, which I think is super important. Yes.
Hi, I've got a question which is about trust and how you actually make Passkey as a password replacement into a true 2FA, a strong authentication method. In particular, when it comes to creation of the passkey, or for that matter, if you're only using FIDO, the same problem remains of a digital channel. You don't actually have additional factors.
So, I mean, I'll just briefly make the comment, right? So passkeys, or we consider a passkey as two factors because there's key possession. So there's the physical device possession, which is like the passkey is housed somewhere, it's stored. And then the second being the user is able to unlock the passkey because they need access to that particular device. So that's usually via lock screen, right? Whatever way you can unlock the phone or the laptop, that's the mechanism that you prove I'm authorized to exercise or use this particular passkey. Things do become a little bit more murky. I do agree in the world where passkeys are now synced and backed up to some cloud and can then get synced down because access to that cloud would give someone access to the passkey. So we want to ensure that the access to that synced data is at the same level or higher than the criteria that we're putting on top of passkeys. So as long as those things hold, like for example, iCloud with iCloud Keychain, Apple made the statement at some point that any iCloud account that has a passkey stored in it is subject to MFA already. So this kind of like by transference, we're meeting that same security bar. That might not be true for all passkey implementations, which is something, again, back to this question about financial services and regulated industries and auditors. We need to be able to, I think, have stronger statements around that. Today, for our implementation, we think that roughly speaking, passkeys are safer than password plus legacy forms of MFA, and that's the way that we've deployed it. But I do realize that there's more work to be done here on the compliance and the regulation side to ensure that those properties do hold.
It's also a good reminder that we've been at this for around 6 months, and we'll continue to do this hard work. And it's an imperative for everyone in the Alliance to address these use cases and think about how to evolve these things. I think we have time for one more, and then we have a wrap-up question here.
I've got one here.
I'm sorry.
Full disclosure, my name is Shane. I work in the FIDO Alliance, and because I'm a fidgeter, I sat down and created a Hyatt passkey while you were presenting. So my question's for Hannah. One thing I noticed is during the passkey registration experience, even though I had provided, I had to do email OTP as part of the login process, you have an additional prompt for email OTP at the time of password creation. And I found that high friction sort of experience, and I wonder why you do that. Like, I'm really interested in understanding why the act of creating a passkey first required an email OTP process in mind.
Sure. The reason we do that is because we calculate risk based on your sign-in method in other places of the site where high-risk activity is happening. And because we are treating at this time passkeys as a more secure method, we want to make sure that you're in a verified state, in a state that we trust before you create that passkey, because then we are going to treat that passkey with higher trust in the future. I do agree there is definitely more friction there, and it might be something we reevaluate in the future, but that's where we started.
So show of hands, how many people just now set up a passkey with Hyatt? All right, Hannah, this is highly productive.
Appreciate it.
Who this week, thanks to Christian's constant reminders, have set up Google account passkeys? All right, nice. This is very effective marketing, everybody.
Money well spent.
Fantastic. Okay, so final questions. I'll start with Rakan and work our way down to Christian. And any tips for people here? We've talked about a lot today, actually. Any suggestions for this? I'm sitting in the audience. I want to deploy passkeys. What's my big takeaway?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I see is that making sure that users really understand the perceived benefit of Passkey. I think that it's also important to consider across your touch points, where do customers have the most painful experience with authentication? So maybe perhaps it's in the password reset flow where they've just gone through the password, the pain of actually resetting. So use the passkey as a painkiller at that point, right? Make sure that you're best friends with your content strategists. That's going to be really, really, really important, right? And I think like the thing is that you want to make sure that people have we're all very distracted. We live in a world where there's high cognitive load. Make sure that the first time experience is exceptional. People learn by doing, and if you make the first time experience really exceptional, you're going to get a better result for passkey adoption.
Thank you. Anna?
I would say there are amazing resources out there. Take advantage of them. Passkeys.dev is a great resource, especially if you're like us and your brain starts to melt when you're trying to figure out, okay, I've got this device, it's got this operating system, I'm using this browser, what is the experience going to be like? There's some great resources there that really talk through what you can expect and what's planned to be supported in the future. WebAuthn.io, it's a great demo site. We relied heavily on it. We used it as a troubleshooting resource when we were trying to find out if it was an issue that we could control or an issue we couldn't control. And then also the people who are working on passkeys are so helpful. They really want the technology to succeed. They want people to have great experiences, and that means they want your implementation to succeed. We've received really generous offers of help. So definitely the resources are out there, and you should take advantage of them.
Thank you so much. Christian?
I think both Rakan and Hannah gave pretty much everything that I would say. The last thing that I could add is don't wait, deploy today, right? I mean, I think we really are ready. Over since last year that we, we're speaking here was a little bit before WWDC, where Apple's Passkey implementation was announced. A little bit later that year in November, we announced ours. So it's been less than a year, right? It's been about 6 months since the ARIA implementation was out there with all of the bells and whistles and the synchronization and everything. So we are really still early stage, but I think the program is fairly complete, where, with our implementation, and again, I'll say, please try it out, go through it, show your CISO, right? If folks don't want to believe it, actually take them through the process. I think you can build a very, very compelling business case today to deploy passkeys, and then look at all the resources that folks spoke about here, like WebAuthn.io, Passkeys.dev. I mean, there's all fantastic stuff. Work closely with your content strategist, absolutely, UXW, all the folks inside of the company, all your resources. I mean, you're going to need all of them on this journey, because this journey is hard, right? I mean, it took us, a good 9 months of hard engineering work to get where we wanted to go with this, because we wanted to make sure that we delivered a first-class product that could be a reference implementation. But I think the pieces are all there. You just have to assemble them.
Awesome. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists today. It was a great conversation. Thank you all so much.